know how many people are going to show up today.
It's okay, so we just sit here to say 8, right?
Yeah, so at 2, we should have.
Okay, welcome everyone to the USC Spatial Sciences Institute GIS Day event. We had a really fantastic panel coming to us to talk about their storytelling origins. We're honored today to have Dave Howard, who's a professor and former chair of the John Wells Division of Writing and Screen and Television for the USC School of Cinematic Arts, join us. We have Gabriel Kahn, professor in the USC Annenberg School of Journalism, who also runs the Media Economics and Entrepreneurship program. And we also welcome Cooper Thomas, who's the Cartography content strategist for the International Esri Story Maps team. So I'm Jennifer Swift. I'm a professor in the Spatial Sciences Institute, and I'm hosting and co-hosting with my fantastic colleague Kate Lester, who's in the room there. So this is both hybrid and online, and I see we have a lot more people joining us online. So we'll go ahead with our panel presentations, and then I welcome any and all questions to the question and answer Zoom. And then at the end, we'll go to all of the questions and answers that are posted for our panel. So we'll start with Dave Howard. So Dave.
Okay, I guess I'll pull up my screen. Hi, everyone. Thank you. I realize I've never made a PowerPoint about myself before. It's a very strange feeling. So here it is. And I could have just as easily said the accidental academic, but I'm going to talk about plan versus reality. So my original plan was I was going to go to film school, I was going to write films, and I was going to pay the bills. So I went to Columbia University, very lucky to get there, got an MFA in screenwriting and directing, and studied with the illustrious Frank Daniel and Milos Forman, and very lucky. It was a TA scholarship, so everything was going exactly according to plan. The reality was I went to film school and still paid my bills, but the bills were paid by working for a production company as a reader. Thankfully, I had a gainfully employed wife as well, because reading was not going to be making the bills go away. But through almost no fault of my own, there was some academic interest in me, and I was offered a position to start teaching here at USC as an adjunct. And it seemed okay, right along with the plan. It would bring me to LA. It would enable me to have a little bit of income, and at the same time be in the city that I needed to be into to break into the American film industry. So not too far afield. But then there came a period where I was saying, well, am I an academic or am I a writer? The plan had been that I was going to teach until I had some kind of a breakthrough, and discovered right away that teaching was really wonderful exercise for one's imagination, for storytelling, for broadening one's horizons and ability to take on just about any kind of story. And I found it surprisingly satisfying. Unlike a writer's life, it was very social and interactive, and with students a great deal. Also part of the plan was the sort of things that I write, the kinds of things that I did in school and out of school, were human scale stories, right at a time where the industry was really seriously starting to take on blockbusters and moving towards superheroes and various universes of that kind of thing. So I'm I'm out of school. I've a year of writing with no writing work and discover myself as a full-time academic. I'm put on a tenure track after 1 year, and I'm teaching a full load. And surprise of all is I'm offered a chance to create the graduate screenwriting program, which was the basis of the Wells division as it is now. So I'm 1 year out of film school, and I'm being given the best job an academic could ever ask for, a chance to write or to create a program in my discipline exactly as I would want to have it. And I was so freshly out of school, I knew exactly what I wanted, what I didn't exactly know how to get it, but I was at least in a position to find the people, put together the program, and do all of that. And so writing seems to be taking quite a back seat, let's say. So the graduate screenwriting program, I'm getting that up and running. I've got an assistant, a small office. I'm pulling together the students that we're going to do, the admissions and all of the various processes. I'm gathering faculty from everyone that I can find that seems appropriate to the things that we're creating in the screenwriting program. And I get my first small job. I wrote for Rugrats in its very first season, the one that won an Emmy Award. Was great fun and very nice. And then at the same time, or shortly after, I got another small job where I wrote a really tiny film. I mean, it was a 19-day shoot. If you have any idea of how long normal films take, you realize 4 weeks is really short. But it had one Academy Award winner as the director and 3 future Academy Award winners making the film. It did very, very well. It won a lot of awards, but there was a bit of a credit issue, my credit in particular. And so I was still not really fully established in the American film industry. Meanwhile, in this accidental career as an academic, the graduate screenwriting program is hitting a home run in our first at bat. Literally, the first thesis script that we accepted was Hand the Rocks a Cradle, which sold like the week after graduation, went immediately into production and became the #1 film in the country without any stars or any special effects. Which meant that this tiny little program that I had created was starting to grow and get attention and take my time as if it wasn't already taking my time. And I said, well, okay, work where you wanted. And so I kept on going with that. The Rugrats experience led to an opportunity to create an animated children's series in Germany that got produced, and that did fairly well, and that led to a chance to do my first, pretty serious film that there was no question I was going to be the sole writer on it and so on. And that was My Friend Joe. It was a German company had hired me, but we shot in Ireland. It was a Swedish novel adapted by an American writer with a British director, a German company, and Irish and American actors. So about as international as one can get. And that ended up winning the top prize at the Berlin Film Festival, the best children's film that year, which, all right, now I'm starting to actually get something of a writing career, which is great. So now I'm teaching full-time, I'm writing full-time, and I'm a full-time administrator of this program. And because I'm not busy, I'm asked to write a book on screenwriting. So I did that, which turned out to be quite fortuitous. I got promoted to associate professor, and we had a child. So yeah, life was going on, and it was like I'll sleep some other decade, I guess. So things started to happen in a relatively good way for me. All of the different writing programs within the film school were consolidated under the umbrella of the program that I'd built, but the outgoing president of the Writers Guild became the chair, and I became associate chair, which meant I could step back a little bit. The graduate screenwriting program was going great. My own writing program, at least in the U.S., didn't really much exist, but I had a pretty good career going in Europe, where there were good projects, a lot of travel, getting to know a lot of European filmmakers. Not exactly Hollywood paydays, but I almost had steady work. At least as screenwriters go, steady work is you work once in a while. But clearly the reality was also setting in that I couldn't be full-time at all of these jobs and have a child and a wife and a life. So I stepped down from the administrating and continued to teach full-time, and also write as full-time as I could. So my next goal was, all right, there's a career going there. Can I move it closer to home? So I'm trying to find work in this hemisphere. Well, I got relatively close. I got a film made in Canada, and then I did some more animation. I wrote a project that was animated in Puerto Rico. And then one of the more interesting things that I got to do is I was asked, telenovelas in Brazil get about 90% of the viewership at any given time. And they were in a sort of a panic because they were only getting 75% of the viewers. And so I was asked to come stir the pot of the development process. And in stirring the pot, we developed the most successful telenovela in Brazilian history, 27 seasons. Most of them lasted a season up until that time. Got to move a little farther north, Mexico. I made a film in Mexico. Then I did a series in Mexico. So I'm getting closer to home, at least in this this hemisphere. And so I'm writing, and I'm teaching, and I'm seeing the world. And I realize that's not so bad. It isn't an American writing career, but I'm ending up doing workshops throughout Europe, Central Latin America, the Middle East, Israel, then starting to go farther away. Instead of going east, I'm going west. Now I'm going to New Zealand and Indonesia and South Korea, and in the last few years, a good deal of time in China. But I realized in the end, it really comes down to what I'd earlier sort of accepted, which is work where you're wanted and just embrace what it is that the world wants you to do. So I accidentally became an academic. Academia came much easier for me than the writing part of it, but I've kept on writing and try and make that work. And then meanwhile, the students that come through this program, by whatever name, are an incredible bunch of people. They've won Oscars and Emmys and showrunners and household names that you know. And one of the more gratifying things is some of them are also starting to become accidental academics as well. And they've started to come back and start teaching. So it was never my plan to become an academic. I went to film school to write films, and it took a few left turns, a few right turns, and it finally got to be some sort of a balance between the two. I've never left academia. but I've never left wanting to write for film and television as well. So that's my breakthrough.
Oh, thank you. That was great. That's a great story.
Thanks, Jenny.
Yeah, so many accomplishments.
Uh,
Fantastic.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. So next we're very, very happy and lucky to have Gabriel Kahn with us. So Gabe.
Hi, everybody. Let me just share my screen here. And I just want to talk for a moment about, so first of all, I'm a professor in the journalism school. I was an economic and business reporter for many years. I joined USC in 2010. A few years ago, I began trying to work on this very thorny problem of how do we improve the local news ecosystem. And let me just sort of lay out the scope of this problem and its severity. There is no true sustainable business model for local news. You might think, you know, the New York Times is actually doing quite well. The Wall Street Journal, Washington Post, and places like that are doing fine on the local level because of the way in which we consume data and the way in which, the way in which we consume news and the way in which social media serves up advertisements and the way in which search serves up advertisements, et cetera. Your local news outlet is struggling mightily. And that presents major problems for everything from democracy to just how your local government functions. Just very quickly, when a local news outlet closes and a community no longer has a trusted source of local news, fewer people vote, fewer people run for office, polarization increases, public corruption increases, and people migrate to places like Facebook groups and Nextdoor where nobody gets along with anybody, and it's very difficult to separate fact from fiction. It is a national crisis, but don't worry, because I've fixed it. And so what I have been doing for the past 5 years is saying, you know what, so much of local news is actually about a couple of topics: public safety, traffic, housing, air quality, things like that, weather. There's data for just about all of that stuff. And so we began looking at these public sources of data that the city of Los Angeles publishes, and San Francisco and Seattle and El Paso and places like that. And so you can find data for every crime record and every parking ticket and so on and so forth. So we started collecting all of this data, and all of this data actually has a location to it. And the location is a latitude longitude that allows us to then sort of understand how this story is unfolding. And so I've just been very lucky at USC to be able to work with computer scientists and people outside of my immediate discipline, because the problem that we're trying to solve is a very thorny one, and you need an interdisciplinary approach to do that. So I'll just sort of walk you through this and this kind of experiment that we've been working with for the past few years. So we collect all of this publicly available data, which is out there and again available, but not really publicly accessible. And so we try to make that data accessible to the public in a way that makes sense. So here we're taking data science and merging it with the kind of storytelling and meaning making of journalism. And we collect this raw data, we make a copy of it in the cloud, we synthesize it, and we turn that into news. So for example, we can do stories on, you know, during COVID, there were suddenly lots of people, you know, out of work, couldn't make rent. This is before COVID relief started to come in. So we were able to chart how many disputes there were with landlords in these times and how that was spiking at the last day of the month, the first day of the month. We were able to also track how, for example, there's during COVID, crime fell initially, yet one type of crime, stolen cars, began to skyrocket like never before. The thing is that in a city like Los Angeles, which is 500 square miles, 4 million people, where you live really defines your experience. As real estate agents will tell you, it's location, location, location. So what we're trying to do is figure out how can we actually bring this data and tell stories about people in the place where they live. The other thing about this that I'm just going to mention here quickly is that by collecting all of this data and harnessing this data to tell stories, we dramatically bring down the costs for producing local news. We make it super easy, and I'll show you guys in a moment how that works. We make it super easy to see these trends, to see where they are located, et cetera. So the kind of reporting that a reporter used to have to do of going to the place, digging through public records or something like that, we have automated to a large extent. That frees up other time for deeper types of reporting that they can do. The other thing, what we can do is we realized when we collect all of this data about a large city like Los Angeles or Chicago, where we're also working, we can see inequity in ways that previously wasn't available to us. And so, for example, we saw how COVID infections initially were impacting wealthy neighborhoods in the first days, and that's partly because wealthy people had access to testing kits in the early days of COVID before they were widely available. So the cases seemed to be there. Within a few months, it all had shifted, and poorer, more densely populated places had much higher rates of infection. We looked at wondering who in California, since marijuana was legalized for recreational use in 2018, who was still being arrested for this. And we found out that the arrests for every racial group had dropped dramatically, except for Black people, which had doubled. And so that was just all hiding in the data for us to see. And we were able to kind of put that together. Our goal here is to use this as a way of delivering information, and information that is about core quality of life issues to the communities who need them. And we try to do that with considering that almost all media consumption now takes place on our phone, right? That you've got the limitations of that screen and the attention span there. We try to do it in a highly visual way with lots of different data visualizations in order to get a point across. And we also allow the audience to access this data themselves and try to figure out their own story from it on a place-based way through interactive maps that we've used. So what we're really trying to do is kind of change the approach to journalism and change the way in which audiences can engage with that journalism. The other thing, because we're collecting data about an entire city, there are vast portions of this city that never get any news coverage except when there's some horrible crime or something like that. Because we have data about all these places, we're able to cover all of these places. And I'll explain how we do that in a minute, because usually there's tremendous inequities also in who gets news coverage and what kind of news coverage they get. So I'm just gonna, let's see here, go to a different panel here. For example, this is our data in Chicago, where we're working with WBEZ on a similar project. And this is just the number of traffic crashes, details about each traffic crash that has happened in Chicago. And it's got lots of wonderful things like that. It's just sitting here sort of, again, gathering dust on a public website. What we do is we take that data and we can say, okay, so since 2020, let's look at the number of traffic collisions in Chicago. You can see the predictable dip during the first month of COVID, then we see it rise above its pre-pandemic levels, right? Another dip, they have a little bit of a seasonal thing where the highest number of crashes are usually kind of in the early summer when rains come and stuff like that. So it's very easy for us to kind of locate that, but that's not just the only story we've got going on here. We also want to know, okay, so where are these traffic crashes happening? Some neighborhoods are different than others. So we can break down those crashes by neighborhood, and we can even visualize those in different ways. So we can see when we talk about traffic safety in Chicago, and if anybody on here is from the city of Chicago, you might recognize some of these place names. You know, we can see that the neighborhood of Austin is clearly has the worst traffic safety, and other neighborhoods, Avondale, Ashburn, et cetera, kind of in the middle. And then some of these have barely any traffic collisions at all. That's really important for the people in those neighborhoods. And also we can tell them how traffic has changed over time in those neighborhoods. The other things that we can do here, for example, we have all of the 311 complaint data that people call into the city. So we can look at where rodent complaints are happening in Chicago. So we can tell all of these different stories. You know, Westtown has the most complaints about rat infestations, and Riverdale has barely any. So once you actually pull that data apart, people can see themselves in the data. They can become greater advocates for themselves and for their communities, because suddenly they have actual verifiable information about them, and they can see how that data compares to other communities in the same city. I'll just give you one other example. We did a story on what's the most dangerous intersection in Los Angeles, and we just found the intersection, which happens to be in Van Nuys, where the most traffic collisions had occurred in the past 12 months. And we did that story, and we made a top 10 list of the most dangerous intersections. Local television news trucks descended on that intersection like they were covering Fallujah. You can imagine a story about traffic in LA, the most dangerous intersection. That resonates well with TV news. But the people in that community reached out to us and said, thank you. We've been complaining about this intersection for ages, but we never had any way to compare it to other intersections or anything like that. By giving us the data, you've allowed us to be the squeaky wheel and to advocate for ourselves finally. So now we can take this to our city council person. We can take this to the Department of Transportation and say, listen, there's a real problem here. You need to change the traffic signals or something like that in order to make this safe. Still within news, we've got a problem here. The problem is that we've got all of this information about all of these different communities, about things that people actually care about. And we know that they care about them because they complain about them on Nextdoor and Facebook groups all the time. They just don't have any data about them. But how do we get this information to that last mile? How do we get it to our readers? So with the help of my computer science colleagues, and I actually want to give a shout out right now to Professor Luciano Nocera, who I'm the one who talks about this. He's the one who actually built it. And I believe that Professor Nocera also works with SSI and has an affiliation. So he built us a platform that allows us to write a newsletter, as we've got here, and then create a different version of this newsletter for every neighborhood in the city. So on Wednesdays, today, we sent out 114 different newsletters, one for each neighborhood in Los Angeles. That's tremendous amount of reach and specificity and allows us to tailor a message to different communities. What we do is we write one version here, and everything here that's in blue is a variable that's going to be specific to that neighborhood when we write that. So when we actually mail them out, it looks like this. We can do one newsletter for Baldwin Hills Crenshaw, and this is the number of car break-ins that have happened in the city. And this version tells us that in Baldwin Hills Crenshaw, there have been 214 of these. A year ago, during the same period, there were 168. And 3 years ago, there were actually 302. And we can see what the rate of car break-ins in Baldwin Hills is and where they rank here compared to other neighborhoods in the city. So you get to see how you are related to these other things. We also do something about road rage in Baldwin Hills, and so on and so forth. And if we were to look at this for, say, Tarzana, let me pick another neighborhood that might be different. Sun Valley, we just get a different set of data that we put in for Sun Valley. So what we're able to do is customize the news for community without having the commensurate increase in labor that would have traditionally taken, because that would be prohibitive for local news. So hopefully what we're doing is we're finding a way to get more from less in terms of the way in which we interact with audiences and so forth. And now we've basically proven that this is possible to do in Los Angeles. And our goal is to prove that we can do it in other places as well. So we've just launched a newsletter with
You accidentally muted yourself.
I'm so sorry. I was
That's
saying
okay.
Hilarious jokes. I hope that didn't go on too long.
No, go ahead.
We just launched one with this similar newsletter product with a news organization in Chicago, WBEZ. You might know them from Wait, Wait, Don't Tell Me or This American Life, and with a TV station in Raleigh, North Carolina. So basically what we're trying to do is create a solution for local journalism and hyperlocal journalism that we can export across the nation and therefore help alleviate this tremendous crisis of this erosion of local news. I yield my time back to the woman in the center of my screen.
Thank you, Gabe. That was a great story. I mean, it's really, that's also geographic and spatial, and it shows like the direct link there and how critical that is to this kind of reporting. So
yeah, I
and
just
it-
want to say it's journalism meets computer science, and I think that there's so much that you can get when you actually work across disciplines.
thank you so much.
And universities don't make it easy for you to do that, by the way. You have to fight for it to break down those walls.
Great. Thank you so much for that story. Okay, so next we have Cooper Thomas.
Great. Well, thanks so much. Let me go ahead and share my screen here. It's funny kind of listening to these presentations because I think there are a lot of points of overlap, but also some, interesting and kind of provocative maybe differences in how we've approached our careers that I think are illuminating at the very least, and certainly provide some food for thought. So my name is Cooper Thomas. I'm a cartography content strategist on Esri's Story Maps team, where for the past 8 years or so, I have been producing multimedia map-based stories about a variety of topics, and also really enabling our burgeoning community of digital storytellers to harness the power of geography and their own data to do the same. Like David, I don't often make PowerPoints or presentations about myself, and so this was a fun exercise in kind of reflection. And when I look back on my career, it's very evident to me that it wasn't kind of a linear trajectory from point A to where I am today. But there are a few kind of specific moments or experiences that I think really had an outsized impact on my growth as a cartographer and as a storyteller, and that I think really kind of influenced my career growth. And those are what I'd like to share with you today. So to begin, we kind of have to go back a couple of decades to a time when I was in, I guess, late middle school or maybe early high school. And it should come as no surprise to you that I, as a professional map maker, have loved maps for as long as I can remember. But I think for most of my adolescence, I really sort of regarded maps as these utilitarian tools, things that might help us navigate from point A to point B, or to find like a tasty sandwich for lunch or something. But I didn't really see maps as a medium with the capacity to provoke an emotional response or to carry a narrative, really. And for me, that changed in 8th or 9th grade when I was first introduced to the maps of a cartographer named Richard Eads Harrison. He was an American cartographer who made a name for himself producing maps for magazines during the Second World War. And whereas most of his contemporaries were producing, beautiful but fairly conventional sort of top-down flat maps that, really adhered to established cartographic patterns like the Mercator projection and north always pointing up. Harrison instead really embraced 3D and oblique perspectives and unusual projections to visualize familiar geographies, but with very kind of novel or unorthodox perspectives. This map here in the background is one of the first that I saw of his, and this presents a view of Northwestern Europe, but presented from sort of a Northwestern vantage point. And this is not a view from which we typically see Europe. And for me, this map and others of his maps really kind of challenged and in some ways subverted my understanding of geographic relationships, of geographic space. And in many ways, his maps weren't just kind of informative, they were provocative, they were persuasive, they spurred thought and conversation just by virtue of the fact that they were presenting the world through kind of a new lens, through different perspectives. And for me, that was a super eye-opening experience. Here I was thinking that maps were purely sort of these cold, sterile, utilitarian, things, when these maps really show me that they can, again, they can really kind of provoke that conversation, that thought, that curiosity that draws you in and really makes you ask questions of what you're looking at. This map here was one of his most popular ones that uses a polar projection to look at areas of territorial control during the Second World War, specifically with, this hypothetical if, if Germany had defeated Russia or the USSR. And this to me really, it made me realize like, wow, North America is a lot closer to Asian Russia than we thought. And that for me, again, was just kind of an eye-opening experience that, again, kind of transformed my understanding of what maps are and what maps can really do. My next aha moment kind of arrived a few years later in 2012. And at this point, I was at university. I was studying geography and digital arts. And like many undergraduate students, I'd identified, I think, a few different kind of topics of curiosity. In my case, human geography on one hand as sort of that academic or intellectual curiosity, and then 3D modeling and animation as sort of like my technical interest, right? But I hadn't really figured out a way how to marry these interests together into a fulfilling career. And I kind of resigned to, I guess I'm going to spend my days making maps of sewers for a municipality and, get my cartographic kicks elsewhere. And then in December of that year, the New York Times published this article called Snowfall on their website. And I'm sure some of you may be familiar with this article already, as its publication, I think, is still kind of regarded as a bit of a watershed moment in contemporary journalism. Snowfall was a multimedia feature that combined traditional kind of, narrative journalism, long-form journalism with interactive and animated maps and graphics and photos in this really kind of rich experience. And this was really kind of the first time that major publications embraced this idea of multimedia interactivity. I don't know why this little highlight reel is flashing like that. Well, that's a little distracting. I'm just going to go back here to this lovely cover page. And I think what was so kind of cool and so groundbreaking about this particular article is that readers weren't just kind of expected to passively absorb the information in kind of a conventional, transfer of knowledge from the reporter to the reader. Instead, they were encouraged to interact with the content. They had a sense of agency over the speed with which the story progressed. There was a very clear, linear narrative here, but if you're really interested in the topic, there were opportunities to dive a little bit deeper, to seek, a little bit more information here and there. And that was really exciting. That was new, and it, for me, really kind of crystallized a lot of these ideas that I had floating around in my head about, maps have this capacity to engage and to tell stories, but I'm not really sure how to kind of integrate them with modern technology. Incidentally, at the time this article came out, I was interning at a digital media studio that made interactive exhibits for museums, and there were some very kind of salient parallels, I think, in the approaches to kind of engaging readers and drawing them in. I think something else that's really interesting about this story, Gabriel, you were talking about hyperlocal news and kind of delivering information to people that is relevant to them directly. And I think something that's really cool about this story is that it's doing the exact opposite. It is taking a story that has very little bearing on most of our lives, this one specific avalanche, and really transporting the reader into this little immersive world that it's created through these rich maps and graphics. And I thought that was just so cool and so creative and novel. And the use of animated maps and interactive maps here was so central to the delivery of the story here. They weren't just included as bit part players, to provide geographic context or, to add some visual panache. The maps here were really kind of integral parts of the narrative. And that was just so new and exciting for me. There are also some really cool kind of technological innovations that this story featured. This was one of the first stories that employed this scrolly telling paradigm that I think is now, virtually ubiquitous in digital media, whereas you scroll through the story, different elements kind of animate or transform in response to your kind of navigation through that story. also, many of the maps in this story were created with tools that really transcended the traditional cartography toolkit, right? I mean, we're talking about tools like Maya and Cinema 4D, you know, tools that are typically the domain of feature film production and TV production. And here they were being used to create these almost photorealistic maps. And again, that was just like, it just clicked for me, right? Like, cartography doesn't just need to be about ArcGIS and sort of the traditional patterns and canon of cartographic production. You can also combine it with these other disciplines to create really rich, meaningful experiences. And that kind of brings me to this third sort of inflection point in my career, which occurred a couple of years later. I was actually at a conference, a mapping conference, and had the privilege to sit down and actually talk to some of the graphics reporters that produced or contributed to this New York Times piece. And, you know, once I'd gotten over kind of my excitement and my whatever starstruck, you know, reaction to seeing these people that I so admired, I asked them, you know, what was the process like for conceptualizing this story? How did you know it was going to work? And the reporter kind of turned to me and said very offhandedly, he sort of shrugged and said something like, well, we were just kind of winging it. And, you know, I think this is just an offhanded comment, and I don't know if he meant it seriously, but for me, it was a really timely reminder that both cartography and storytelling, sure, they are skills that can be developed through theory and through study, but they're also skills that I think really reward experimentation. And you know, again, as Gabriel was saying, these are inherently interdisciplinary fields, and I think, again, they really you know, encourage outside perspectives and unorthodox approaches. And for me to hear from such a, you know, such a respected and reputable source that sometimes you should just kind of tug on that loose thread of an idea to see what happens. That for me really removed a lot of the inhibitions in my own creative approach to map making and storytelling. And I think really gave me the confidence to try new things. And I've really tried to carry that ethos of curiosity and experimentation into the work that I do today. So, you know, here's an example of a story we produced about the seabed. And just for fun, we were like, what would this look like if we just drained all the, you know, if you drilled a hole in the bottom of the seabed and just drained all the water out, you know, why not? Another kind of whimsical example here, you know, rendering the density of noise complaints in my hometown of Portland, but using these weird sort of extruded contours. Is it practical? No. Is it interesting? Is it going to maybe start a conversation? Is it going to draw someone in who might otherwise skip right over a more conventional map? Maybe so. This kind of approach, I think, has also challenged me to rethink what kind of geographies are really suitable for map-based storytelling. Here's an example of a story on Formula One circuits, to which we applied a lot of these kind of traditional geographic storytelling techniques, but at a very different scale here, looking at, you know, these specific tracks. Thinking about storytelling across different scales. Here's a story that basically recreated a museum exhibit in SketchUp and then guided readers through it during the pandemic. It's a very small area, right? But then we also, you know, we've done stories about mapping on a cosmic scale, you know, taking these images and treating them as though they were maps and panning and zooming around them in really interesting ways. Again, I think being sort of reminded that experimentation is okay and that it can yield really exciting results has helped keep my sort of creative practice fresh, and has, you know, allowed me to continue to kind of grow and develop as a cartographer and a storyteller, despite the fact that, you know, I've been doing on paper essentially the same thing for the past decade or so. So if I could just leave you with a couple takeaways, I'd say, you know, maps don't have to be utilitarian. They can be very provocative. They can also play leading roles in our stories. They don't need to be sort of secondary figures. You can really hang a narrative on a map if that map is well designed and thoughtfully implemented. And then finally, that map making and storytelling really do encourage and reward that kind of unorthodox, outside of the box thinking and approaches. And even if only one out of 100 ideas works, sometimes it's that one idea that kind of is the start of something new and exciting, and that's a worthwhile pursuit. So I think I'll stop there. Thanks so much again for the invitation, and this was again a fun exercise to kind of peer back in the rearview mirror a little bit and reflect on my own sort of cartography and storytelling career.
Oh, thank you so much. Thank you. That was great. And very interesting points along the way in your journey. I'd like to open it up to questions for our panel. We had a question in the question and answer by Tom Salva for Gabe Kahn. He asked if you think you see journalism or journalists in the future. What is the relationship with journalism and spatial science?
So I think Cooper actually answered that question by showing that snowfall example, which again was kind of a game changer in what can be done with technology and storytelling and the craft of journalism. So again, when I sort of started in this business, my technology was a notebook and a pencil and maybe a keyboard for typing. Clearly, there are so many more engaging, powerful, and enriching modes of storytelling. I've been working with location-based data for the past few years, but those and some of the examples that Cooper showed also use that kind of location-based data. But that sort of spatial science in terms of helping us understand the world around us, which is a big component of journalism, is just absolutely essential. And I welcome people from different disciplines and different educational backgrounds into this profession because it's really wide open.
Thank you. That was that's excellent. In the conference room, I see a number of people. Does anyone have questions in the conference room for the panel?
Yep, we got one.
I have a question for Gabriel about, with all of this data and access, and how do you deal, and media coverage and news, how do you deal with misleading information? Because since there's so much access to information, it could be presented in a number of different ways.
So, I mean, I think that that's true for the example that I showed and also for the profession of journalism in general. There are responsible news outlets and there are ones that are less responsible. I would say that the distinguishing feature of a responsible news provider is one that is willing to be accountable to its audiences. So for example, if we present data or if we present information and the audience says, that doesn't seem accurate, you've got to respond to that in the most public and transparent way as possible. So transparency is key to all of this. Also, when you're using data, you have to be aware of what the capabilities of that data are and what the limitations of that data are. So for example, with crime data, that is a fraught topic. One of the things in terms of crime and news on crime, it is that it's been one of the most racially biased beats in America for decades. And I'll just give you an example. The number of Black suspects who are shown on the news is something like, the percentage of them is like 3 times higher than the number of Black suspects that exist in the police data. They're overrepresented on the news, which creates an impression, which creates all types of, or I should say, accelerates and increases racial bias in the perception of the public. One thing about the data is that it's data, right? It allows us to take somewhat of a more dispassionate view of what's happening. For example, on my next door community in my neighborhood, people are convinced that they're in the middle of a burglary wave. Why? Because they all have Ring doorbell cameras now, and anytime anybody suspicious peers into their house, they broadcast that on, they take the video and they put it on Nextdoor or a Facebook group or something like that. The number of burglaries has gone down consistently over the last decade. So when you've got the data to put a lie to those impressions, that's also very powerful. But you've also got to understand when there's limitations to that. For example, if we're to report on data involving domestic violence, that's one of the most underreported crimes out there. So we have to be responsible in our reporting and say, there's limitations to this data. This is what the public data shows. There's been a lot of studies that say the real incidence of this are probably 3 times greater than what you're seeing here. We don't know what we don't know. And we want to be transparent and open with our audience about that in the telling of that.
Okay, thank you.
Can I ask a follow-up question?
Yes,
So
Dr.
I think,
Boss.
Gabriel, I think it's really, really interesting what your product does, and I think your response is really thoughtful. I had a similar concern about it as well, in that I think in the social sciences, one very difficult thing is to statistically to separate noise from information, right? So you can have a rate that, first of all, do you use a rate or don't you use a rate? Do you normalize data? And you are normalizing data, right? So that's important, like crimes per 100,000 or something like that, right? In an area, but then also even changes over time that might appear to be significant might actually not be statistically large enough given the sample size, given the structure of the data, to discern a trend, right? And we might write a story and say, well, crime has dropped, but in fact, it's just a probabilistic variation underlying the data. It's actually noise in the data. And I'm wondering if you've thought about like ways in which your programs and so forth could begin to sort through and help people actually, because there's a big difference between data and information then information and knowledge and wisdom, right? There's a long sort of arch to span there across those categories. I'm wondering how your tools will work towards that.
So I'll give you a layman's answer to that, not a sort of statistician's answer. Weather patterns in crime. So I should say weather patterns can influence crime patterns in lots of places. That is, you generally see crime rates go up in the summer, and when you get to really hot days, you see actually more crime in lots of cities, except Los Angeles, where because of our weather being, somewhat consistent year round, you don't see those fluctuations as much. So we have 14 years of crime data in Los Angeles. That allows us to take a better look at what might be a month-to-month change as opposed to an emerging new trend. And we can see how that data here is different than, say, data in Chicago, which is influenced by different factors. Little things like, in the months of March and April, the number of pothole complaints in Chicago is sky high. Why? You've had freezing temperatures, then you've had rains, washing the road out. That's when the roads are in their worst condition. So we're not going to write a story saying, the number of pothole complaints in Chicago has risen by 50% over the last 2 months, because that happens every year, right? So I know that there's probably more computationally appropriate ways to address some of those things, but being a journalist and wanting to make sure that I've vetted my sources and have sort of enough of a bird's eye view of what's going on, that's kind of generally how I approach it. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, thank you. I'd like to, is there another question in the room?
Well, I just, a quick comment / wanted to interject something here, and that was sort of to kind of bring in what David said in the beginning and how Cooper kind of brought it out at the end was, and one thing that you noted, David, was embrace what the world wants you to do. And I just wanted to thank you for saying that as one accidental academic to another. Not what I thought I would be doing when I started, we're all raising our hands here. Not what I thought I would be doing, but it's what I enjoy doing. Obviously, I wouldn't still be here. And it is, I think it's very useful for us to be able to look back at where we came from and kind of how we got here, and to appreciate those steps along the way that led us to where we are. And so I just wanted to thank you. You've had a super impressive creating graduate programs in your first year, but that's beside the point. And I wanted to thank you for kind of bringing that out for not just the students, I guess. for us too.
Yeah, your stories are amazing. They're great. Thank you. I'll ask a question from the online folks, from Angela Leila Hassan. To anyone who wants to answer, how do we engage K through 12 students in storytelling at, or even mapping and data science?
I can take a stab at that, and that's a great question. I think we are seeing kind of a, a proliferation of tools and resources really focused on enhancing geographic literacy in the classroom. I know Esri, my employer, publishes a whole host of kind of free learning tools, curricula, other kinds of materials really focused on, again, kind of getting the next generation of mappers and storytellers an early start on some of both the techniques and the concepts that we've talked about. National Geographic Society as well publishes a whole host of resources. And the reason that I mention these specifically is that it can sometimes be hard to really build out a curriculum or a set of tools that really meet students where they are and kind of match their interests. And these resources are really designed to kind of jumpstart some of those programs. So those are very kind of tactical, maybe solutions. On a more sort of conceptual level, I'm not sure.
I can take a quick stab at that too. So, I mean, just to follow on what Cooper said, but we're seeing this explosion with artificial intelligence now that makes so many of these, what have previously been highly technical operations, very easy in terms of image generation and crunching data and finding trends in data and things like that. The sort of quote going around right now is that the most powerful programming language in the world is English, and anyone who's played with ChatGPT a bit knows that. But I think that for K through 12 students, like the opportunities for them to really interact with some of these things that would have taken a tremendous amount of technical training previously has the barrier to entry has dropped dramatically.
That's great. So a follow-on question for that is, we see emerging a lot of discussions and debate about the responsible use of AI across lots of different domains. So,
in 2 minutes, you want to?
I was almost gonna throw that one to David, but
You're still muted, David.
Please,
I
David,
can
go ahead,
weigh in a
explain this
little
to
bit
us.
on because the Writers Guild actually took that on a little bit. And I think actually one of the most pivotal moments, at least as far as screenwriting, storytelling is concerned, is when it was determined that stories created by AI could not be copyrighted. Suddenly, all the producers and production companies that thought they could get rid of screenwriters started having a different thought, because they wouldn't own the underlying material if it was generated by AI. And I think that was a big part of the leverage that the Writers Guild had in settling its strike. And now there are, and I'm hardly an expert on how it was all settled, but there are limitations and transparency issues and so on that are just in terms of creating what is supposed to be a creative enterprise through an algorithm. It has really been, I think, circumscribed in terms of on-screen storytelling or any generation of stories like that. I can see how it's an incredible tool for my colleagues here. It's more considered a danger in our side of the world. I don't know if that helped anyone.
No, it is, and there's a lot of debate going on how to react to it, how to manage it, how to define what's responsible and what's not.
I've had some colleagues, because we use certain kinds of exercises that are sort of like etudes for the piano, to just we give a set of prompts to our students just to help them learn to describe things in cinematic ways and so on. And I've had a colleague give some of those prompts to AI, and they're pretty good. But it, the minute it gets into human interaction, then it diminishes very quickly.
Thank you. I think we're out of time, but this has been fantastic. We just so appreciate your time and everyone's participation in this excellent panel, and happy GIS Day. I have one quick slide to share, like on behalf of SSI. Let me see if I can share this. Yes. So the Spatial Sciences Institute, we have 18 programs, and also I just wanted to throw up this slide that if you want to contact us or contact any of our panelists, please feel free to reach out to Daron Cairo or Monica Pan if you have any questions at all about our programs. So thank you. All right, fantastic.
Nice to meet you all.
Thanks so much,
Thank
folks.
you so much. Thanks.
Thank you, everybody, for joining.
Bye, everybody.
Thank y'all for who are in the room, and Susan got the swag closet out for us, so feel free to take a couple of our pie